All right. So welcome everybody to the next panel with the title Beyond Play to Earn, DAOs and the new future of the gaming industry. My name is Jan Beriswil and I'm doing token design for Outlier Ventures. And I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. I'm going to let the attendants introduce themselves before I'll give some context, and then we'll launch straight away into a panel discussion. So why don't we go around the way I see you guys on my screen? So that will be Beryl, Marco, and then Robbie.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. Glad to be here. My name is Beryl Lee. I'm co-founder at Yield Guild Games. Yield Guild Games is a DAO. We're a gaming guild that invests in a number of play-to-earn NFTs, and we actually lend these NFTs to our community of players. So I handle finance at YGG, very much like an interdisciplinary role.
Yeah, I'm Marco. I'm the founder of GameDAO, which is a cooperative owned by the community. It offers basically fundraising, coordination, and ownership in the widest sense. Therefore, like we build DAOs inside of DAOs, which can go, for example, for fundraising protocols to collect funding and to coordinate over these for real video games and to build a bridge into the Web3 for all those video games stuck in Web2.
Hi, I'm Robbie Young, and I'm the CEO of Animoca Brands. We're a game developer, blockchain game developer. We make a lot of our own titles like F1 Delta Time, MotoGP Ignition, and the Sandbox. And we also are an active investor in the community. So we've made a lot of minority investments across the blockchain gaming ecosystem.
Great. So let me set the stage a bit before we dive in. So play to earn is a new concept that has really exploded onto the crypto space this year, we could say. And the core of it is that instead of players paying to play the game and different versions of that, it's now flipped around and players actually earn by playing. So that's where the name comes from. And what we're going to discuss in this panel is how this is really just the first manifestation, and like combining these crypto primitives of tokens and NFTs and DAOs, just a whole new field opens up for the gaming industry. A further kind of context to note is that really the leader in this space, and probably the best example, is Axie Infinity. And they have some impressive stats at this point with like 2.5 billion annualized protocol revenues. For context, that's only beaten by Ethereum itself at this point. And they have over 1 million daily active users. If there's a whole ecosystem that catalyzed around it. YGG, I believe, is also got started with Axie as well. So there's really, I'm sure Beryl will have some context here. But yeah, I think what we want to discuss in this panel is not just play to earn, but really more generally the future of gaming as influenced by crypto and blockchain technology. So let's start off with talking a bit about how gaming in the metaverse is more than play to earn, and just maybe moving away from that concept a bit, just kind of looking at it from first principles. Robbie, maybe we can start with you. And by the way, these questions are just meant as prompts. Anybody else who has like some input, please feel free to just make a discussion out of it, and I'll continue with the next prompt once we run out of steam.
Sure.
So Robbie, how do you think we can players can co-create value, and maybe how do you think generally about this space?
Sure. I think first of all, play to earn is a fantastic new innovation, that we have in gaming now as a result of the fact that we have blockchain underpinning a lot of games that have come out recently. But I think we can think about many different things that blockchain enables. Blockchain fundamentally enables content ownership, and so with that ownership comes the ability to trade and monetize the content. And sometimes, I prefer to think of it not so much as play to earn, but play to not lose everything. Because I think one of the good ways to think about blockchain games is that once you have ownership of the content, a lot of people and a lot of media attention, et cetera, has been focused on the idea that people can make money and that what they buy in games, for example, might appreciate in value. But I think the more fundamental change as an industry from traditional gaming to blockchain gaming is more about the idea that players just won't necessarily lose everything. In a traditional game, all the money you spend, 100% of it goes to the developer. You never get anything back. It's a one-way system. Blockchain games, turn that on its head, because that sword that you buy in the game, it may not be worth more than you paid for it, but it's worth something, because a new player coming to the game has the option to go to a marketplace and buy your second-hand memory sword. And so other second-hand marketplace, maybe you want to sell that at a discount because you've decided, I'm tired of this game, I'm going to go to another game. And so there's always a market for second-hand digital goods. And this means that when you don't lose all your money in games, you'll be more likely to spend more money to begin with. So I think that this is an important point that's often lost kind of in the smoke and excitement of all the opportunities to make money.
Yeah, that's a very helpful reframing. So it's very much about all of these in-game items and valuable avatars. All of these things can become NFTs and become portable outside of the game and truly owned by the players.
Yes.
Maybe Marco, you could elaborate a bit on how some of these innovations could transition into the Web2 gaming space, if at all. Like, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, what I observe is like play to earn as a paradigm is quite nice. And of course, it helps a lot, especially if you frame it with a narrative like this. But also there's like a little bit of a downside, so to say, because most creators in the Web2 space, like traditional video games, currently cannot really participate in Web3 enabled games. And on the other end, even the Web3 enabled games, somehow have little incentive at the moment to really innovate in their like business model, for example. So NFTs, from my perspective at the moment, it sounds a bit harsh, but it's more like an add-on feature to existing business models. And so it doesn't really push people to really move into Web3, apart from benefiting from the item ownership upside, which is already a very big one. But, and to answer your question, if we really want to enable this, this industry, which is stuck in Web2, untap and transition into Web3, possibly NFTs and any play to earn mechanics aren't enough. So we need, for example, better tool chains as well, because currently everything Web3 related is super complex in terms of integration. And
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of the business model, I'd like to dive in there a bit more. So we've mentioned by now this ownership of in-game items and so on, like just the fact that players can earn by participating in the games. But I think there's much more, and there's complex ways these intertwine. I think YGG is maybe one of the best early examples of kind of how these new types of business models can be leveraged. So Beryl, I'm wondering what's your take on this? What kind of business models are you excited about, and do you see like picking up more steam?
Yeah, so building up from what Robbie and Marco actually explained about ownership, because users and the community actually end up like owning something, they end up like earning something from because there's like a creation of value, and as that value actually accrues from that ownership, a lot of players are able to end up like affording, and they actually end up having earnings and a bit of income. Because of that, what we see in YGG is applications built on top of the community and of these games. And some of them would actually be in crypto DeFi, right? So we actually see at the intersection of gaming and finance, because now that users are able to amass income, now they're increasing their savings, they're able to make decisions on what to actually purchase. They're actually one of the first users of being able to use MetaMask to cash out. They're also able to actually start like using Uniswap, SushiSwap, and then eventually we're actually seeing the ability to kind of like integrate insurance products, other lending products, and so on and so forth, just because they already have the funds that can actually, that they can actually use for these other applications. And to think about it, a lot of the users, for example, at YGG, never had a bank account before. And yeah, so and news actually came out like 3 months ago about like MetaMask. Out of their 10 million users, 20% of that were from the Philippines, for example. And yeah, so it's quite fascinating how other applications can actually build on top of play to earn games.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think because all of these primitives and mechanisms that come out of the DeFi space are open source and composable, I think it's almost like a pipeline, from like the play to earn acts as an onboarding experience and then really pushes this financial inclusion. And then from there, we can kind of go, like all the way down the crypto rabbit hole in terms of the mechanisms that are layered on top of that. So that's super exciting. Maybe we just stay like a bit more on YGG because I think it's fascinating, especially how there's like these Beryl, if you could elaborate like how these like there's structures of like sub guilds, and like a kind of meta DAO and then like guilds connected with that. Like how does that all work? Like I'm just curious to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so like at YGG, we've taken like this the approach or strategy. So instead of developing, for example, a regional manager or like a like a regional manager or country manager, what we want to build is what we call a sub DAO, where they're almost acting independently from the mother DAO or like the global company. But what we're doing is we're lending out our assets to the sub DAOs who actually who's responsible for acquiring communities from the ground. So this is the like of NDGG, for example. They're in India and they have, for example, really good connections, in the India market, and they're able to really onboard players from these like communities and provinces from India better than, for example, YGG Global. So we've done like a partnership where the mother DAO actually invests in the sub DAO, and the sub DAO actually focuses on accelerating the onboarding of players. And the mother DAO, YGG, because we actually invest in NFTs, we lend them out to the sub DAO that actually extends these NFTs to their players.
Yeah, super nice. In general, like both the business cases of both of you are like super amazing. I would have like two little questions towards you. One, I mean, both are a bit related to the traditional world. I mean, there's like a massive potential in traditional gaming, and mostly untapped. If you see this from a Web3 perspective, for example, yeah. So what I see is like in Web3, you have like a lot of movement in the market and a lot of people who are like moving into this market, for example, because of the very strong argument of financial inclusion. It's a really good thing. But how, for example, do you see the change in awareness in the traditional gaming world? Because currently there's like a lot of sentiment which is more like against everything Web3 and crypto related. That's question number one. And question number two is, of course, because of all of this financial complexity and the values you are creating and making people really integrate into these systems and earn a lot of values, how do you handle regulation? It's a stupid question maybe, but or a show killer.
Well, at least like for us at YGG, that's a very difficult question. But yeah, we're currently like structuring the DAO as we speak, right? We're looking at the because we're kind of like we're looking into a nonprofit structure within the DAO where the SLPs that our players actually earn from Axie get circulated back into, for example, the DAO, right? Because our main responsibility is really buying a number of these NFTs to actually kind of like democratize gaming in the world, right? In a lot of these emerging markets. So yeah, I could actually argue that we're a nonprofit somehow, right? Where the SLPs and revenues from these in-game assets actually end up like going back into the DAO, right? And we just like expand and increase the number of like players and just democratize it. So one is, yeah, we're looking into a nonprofit like kind of like structure The second one is operationally, right? Like if the sub DAOs are actually onboarding players from a certain jurisdiction, then uh, regulators from that jurisdiction would argue that the players that are now, like whether it's a hobby or for work, they're still producing like income, which is actually taxable within a particular jurisdiction. So this is a conversation that we're having with our sub DAOs right now. So they're figuring out how do we actually introduce tax to players that never really needed to declare tax before because they didn't really have income before, right? So this is a conversation that the sub DAO and local government are having in like educating locals. Is there a way to actually include this as an economic zone? So when I say economic zone, like a discount to any taxes that they make until this particular industry kind of flourishes a little bit more. Maybe give it like 3-5 years until they look into taxing. So various jurisdictions, various conversations, and we're not like at least like YGG, we're not like do not pay taxes. No, like we encourage that conversation of our sub DAOs with local government. So we're kind of there right now in terms of regulation, and then in terms of the finance side within within play to earn, right? So we are not creating the actual finance services within Yield Guild Games, but we're doing this through partnerships, right? So we're working with whether it's DeFi platforms or centralized regulated financial institutions. We're open into like working with them to actually provide like services to our community.
That's a super tough question and a really good answer.
Marco, maybe you could expand a bit as well on like how you think about different gaming DAOs interacting and how NFTs and tokens, like how does it all fit together in your view? Because I believe you are building kind of a holistic framework as well with GameDAO. So curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, it's actually our approach at the moment is really our goal, and we didn't reach it yet, of course, is to have something like a legal DAO. And this means, of course, like you have a lot of naysayers who are like arguing like a DAO needs to be fully decentralized and only lives as a protocol on some chain and so on. But if you want to be accountable for certain things you're doing, and this pays into your answer or the question I was asking, is you can decide you are offering certain types of services and you are required to comply to certain regulatory requirements, or you just push all of this to your players or the beneficiaries who are, for example, creating value or receiving added value to something. But I believe none of these both solutions would really cut it. So you need to kind of start earlier to work with regulators to find solutions which scale into many jurisdictions. That's for sure. In our case, we are looking into, for example, cooperatives. We have set up now an initial body, which is more like a vehicle until we are like fully set. And the plan is really to have a cooperative, which is the body for the mother DAO, to say it in your terms. And below that, to enable teams to use this as a blueprint and utilize it to create legal DAOs for their own endeavors. Because from our point of view, again, if we want to enable game creators, for example, or any entity who is interested into video gaming to create their own DAO, which intertwines and interacts with other DAOs as well. Sometimes these companies are real companies, maybe even regulated companies. So you cannot come up with something totally I always say like a funny internet money style hidden somewhere in the Web3. So they couldn't just do it because of whatever compliance reasons. So you need to account for all of these things if you want to have something which integrates with all stakeholders in this. Yeah? Because I guess what we all do is we are like somehow aligning many interests. So for example, gamers who want to have a revenue on a monthly basis or something, or earn something. And game creators who want to create better games, which enable integration of the community, but they want to earn with this as well. And sometimes behind these games are bigger companies like, for example, Animoca brands, who create really big ships. Yeah, and they cannot just do stuff like this, which is totally detached from reality. So you have like questions like identity, you have questions like how do you make stuff more transparent and compliant and so on. I mean, all nasty topics. Yeah, each of these topics can fill like days of discussion. But it's always interesting to see anyway how all of these interests align in the individual approaches. And I guess the two of you have very different functionalities in this market, which is steadily growing.
Yeah, I think we've been doing a good job kind of laying out the whole field with all of its complexities. I'm curious what, Robbie, you think about all of this, especially like, yeah, how does it all fit together, and what's your kind of outlook at Animoca and when it comes to the space?
Sure. I think from our perspective, we come from the lens of traditional gaming. We're developers, and for us, the idea of guilds and DAOs represent what we think is a kind of a natural evolution to player-owned economies, and that's what blockchain enables. So when we think of a guild, it's actually very much like what we would call live ops in gaming. Offboard and chat and manage users and get people excited about new quests and activities inside the game. And now the beauty is that we have very, very active players who are also doing the same thing, which is not to say players didn't do that in the past, but I think what we find is the sense of community that is generated through this shared ownership of assets in the games is even stronger than in traditional games. So these guilds, bringing together people through their alignment of an interest in a game that is both cultural and entertainment as well as monetary is a very powerful concoction together. And I think that, ultimately we see most of the games we create eventually evolving or transitioning into DAO, like governance systems in the long run, because I think it's a fantastic way to enable the longevity of games. We've had a problem in games for years where the developer will support a game, it'll be a hit and they'll support it for a few years, but then the developer and the team get tired because the revenues fall off, the user base gets smaller, and the staff on the developer want to work on a different product because maybe they're bored, and so they move on. And the users who really love the game and have become part of that community are left behind with an unsupported game. So I think the DAO is actually a wonderful construct for which we can transition these kind of games into player-owned economies where they can then take ownership of the game literally themselves into the future and support it, because their in-game economy can actually support them hiring a new developer to develop new content for them, etc.
That's very fascinating. I think this frame of looking, okay, before it was really like almost like in Web 2, it's almost more extreme than VC-backed startups, just like kind of huge upfront costs, and then it's either a hit or a flop. But in either way, like a few years later, everybody moves on and goes on to the next thing. And now with DAOs, it can, yeah, like you said, player-owned economies, so that's a whole different ball game. So I'm wondering what the implications of this are also when it comes to, game funding and development and how the whole thing comes together. I mean, we've seen more than enough experiments when it comes to this. Loot comes to mind, so far we haven't, at least I haven't seen much development there, but it's interesting how they flip that around. What do you think about Marco, and then Beryl as well? Feel free to chime in. What does this imply for how games are developed and funded?
Yeah, I guess to follow up to what Robbie just said, I mean, DAOs are really delivering a nice framing to integrate all interests and align them. And possibly in the future, it will be much more flexible in that regard, that DAOs can even, I mean, if you look at from a little bit from the outside, then you see like whatever, Web2 games, and then you have like their communities happening on certain platforms surrounding. surrounding them. And the same is somehow happening in Web3. It's a bit more closer because there's like financial primitives and interests which interact in a more direct way. But still, it's all like separate tools which are just separate. Yeah. So and of course, like with the primitives of DAOs and DeFi, GameFi, and NFTs as portable assets, you can bring all of these much closer together. And this means we need a space where this can happen. Because currently there's still a disparity between what people can see. For example, in DeFi, it's usually some sort of website where they interact. And then you have like a game world where you can do some whatever cool missions, linear, non-linear gameplay. You have assets you can utilize and so on. And to bring this into something which is maybe more resonating as well with gamers, maybe requires even DAOs and everything related to these protocols we are already offering to let them happen inside of the games. So that's where, like, for example, metaverses come into play. That's a nice way to have something like a third place where you, for example, visit a representative office of your DAO and sit in with your people. But you could also like integrate any kind of primitives all of us are working on. We can integrate them into the games. So, for example, coordination functionality of a DAO can become a vital part of a gameplay. And by this, we already have like this financial incentive, which is required to pay into the longevity of games. Yeah. So the only problem I see there is that at a certain point, you will still have this bored out syndrome on the creator side. Because after 2 years, always playing the same two-step, it's like you want something new. And how can you create a transition for the creators so new people can chime in and create new stuff which fits into the overall model of the game, for example, and make it more evitable and more reasonable over time. Yeah? So people can start to do something new. Especially if you're creative, then you will face this challenge very often. Yeah? Sometimes people can only work 2 weeks on something and then they get bored out. How can you imagine this for like years? Yeah? So this will be, from my perspective, interesting to see.
Yeah, so on my end, so with regards DAOs, right? If I look into it, if I look into the fully diluted valuation of a lot of the DAOs and the games, okay, the fully diluted valuation of a billion, 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, it really scares me, right? But if I actually take off like my traditional hat, for example, and look into it, it probably is a new asset class when you actually issue out governance tokens, just because I'll give you an example, right? Like if I actually own 1% of Facebook during its seed round, after the issuance of preferred and common shares, right? After being diluted in several rounds, right? That 1% is probably 0.0001%, right? Like today. Like Facebook right now is $1 trillion, right? But the thing is, they get to print more common and preferred shares, like over time, whenever they raise new funding. But then with DAOs, it's very different because there's only a fixed amount of tokens that's ever going to be minted, right? And fully diluted valuation means the price that's being priced today, and like pricing the tokens that are currently in circulation, and then you're just multiplying it to the overall supply of like the tokens, right? So in terms of like value, they're very different. And so value, that's one. Strategy, very different as well, just because I think the main value of blockchain and games built on blockchain play to earn is ownership, right? So I guess the strategy for a lot of those built on the blockchain gaming space is like ownership. You're buying your product is actually what you own, right? So you're already selling product, which is the asset. So I guess the strategy is just really different. Um, yeah, and I guess like the third one that I'd also like to point out with the structure is, imagine that I am actually playing a game, spending so many hours, for example, Facebook. I spend so many hours, like for example, using Messenger. I actually, like participate in groups. You use it for calls. Like people actually end up like using Facebook, especially for example in emerging markets like the Philippines. 97% of of our population that has internet connectivity has a Facebook account, but they never earned anything from Facebook, right? Like they if I had money, I can actually buy shares of Facebook. But then with the DAO structure, I don't even need to have any funds to be able to participate in the growth of the network. I get airdrop tokens. So, like for example, for YGG, 45% of our tokens was actually allocated for the community, but most of it is something that we actually airdrop over time. For as long as they achieve something, they spend more time in a particular game, we'll airdrop you something, so they earn it and they can actually be part of it. So I guess that's like very different, um yeah, from traditional, right? Like there's more participation and ownership. So I guess those are the main 3 points that I have.
Yeah, that's great. And I think just picking out a few things. So you've described how these DAO tokens, which are, in a sense, investable assets, where we can say, okay, that's the fully diluted valuation and all of that. But as opposed to being just invested in, they're also earned and by like the people engaging in the DAO. And that is, I think, a major difference we've highlighted throughout this. But there's not just the DAO tokens, right? There's a whole range of different assets, and all of them, or many of them, have a financial value attached to them. So I'm wondering, maybe Robbie, your thoughts around, like, say, game assets as an investment class. Like that's something, seems like something totally new. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Sure. Well, I think we're actually starting to see some of that now. I mean, one of the things that's amazing about tokens to begin with is that NFTs are governed by smart contracts, and they're composable, openly composable assets. And so as a result, we're seeing a lot of innovation happening that's not necessarily from the original developer. I'll give you an example. The first game we launched was called Formula One Delta Time, which was a car racing game. And so you could buy and own Formula One cars. And one of the things we noticed was that some of the cars, there were common cars that were very there were a large number of them, and then there were super rare tiers of cars that were owned by collectors. And very often the collectors' cars would not get used much in the game because these were owned by people who were less interested in playing and more interested in collecting because maybe they love Formula One or something like that. And so we created some DeFi related metagames for them. So we allow them to stake their cars for yield. And we can, because we're a blockchain game, we can hook into the back ends of DeFi and enable some of these different kinds of techniques. But the one that caught us by surprise was when we started to see our cars showing up on another site called Niftyfi, where people were submitting the cars and using them as collateral to get DeFi loans, which they were then using to speculate and yield farm and do all kinds of financial transactions. And that, frankly, we thought was really cool because this was not something that we enabled as a service. This actually shows the genius of open and composable assets because somebody else was able to create a service leveraging on the asset class that we had created of desirable collectible cars. And so they said, we'll offer loans against those cars because we know what the value of those cars are. They're from Animoca brands, they're branded with Formula One. We think they have, real asset value. And so we'll take those as collateral. And I think that's great because that kind of innovation actually just adds to the value and utility of the cars that we create to begin with. So it actually helps us in that they've created a new business. They're not actually stealing customers or anything like that. They're helping us to grow our business by making the ecosystem better.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think we've done a good job kind of outlining how, okay, like the play to earn is a first step. Now people can actually earn from engaging, but this is what's happening here is much more than that, right? We have like maybe play to own would be a better way of also describing it.
Yes,
and
definitely.
then we're moving into like these player owned economies, right? Axie describes itself as a nation for a good reason. So yeah, I think that gives everybody a good outlook over the space and where it's moving. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, next next there is a session, a fireside chat with Marco. So he'll stay on, and the rest of us hopefully have a nice evening.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys
you. Pleasure.
and ladies. Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys. Bye.